And here we are with yet another FHM wish list. Last year I made a pretty extensive wish list for FHM 9. I'll start by quickly going over some things that were in the FHM 9 wish list video, but were not implemented into FHM 9. First off, I mean, it's obvious, but I gotta say it anyway. We need a faster simulation. I don't think anyone's doubting that. Last year I did a simulation speed test comparing the sim speeds of a standard save file with all leagues selected, a standard save file with minimal leagues selected, and a custom game with the NHL and AHL only. And the difference between all of them was quite significant. So clearly the simulation speed has to do with the amount of data that is actually on the save file. So I'm not sure how much hope I have for actually having a faster simulation in FHM 10, but I can dream. And then we had custom keyboard shortcuts. This is frankly something that is long overdue at this point because FHM does not have many shortcuts to it. There's the spacebar, which advances the day, and like a couple others, but that is about it. Even the 8-year-old Eastside Hockey Manager has custom keyboard shortcuts, so that's something that we desperately need here. Especially in a game that has so much page navigation and as being as information heavy as FHM is, it can definitely save players some time, which can only be a good thing, especially in a game that has a slower simulation. Something else that I talked about last year in the FHM 9 wishlist video was the ability to save and load filters that have previously used on roster screens. For example, if I'm looking for a specific type of player during free agency on July 1st, but I can't find an available player that I like, I should be able to save the data that I have entered into the player filter so I can instantly load and come back to it at a later time if I have to without needing to re-input the data. And then I talked about in-game tutorials, or the lack thereof. With how complex franchise mode can be and the sheer amount of information and different screens that there are, it can be overwhelming to a newcomer. If you're a newcomer who's playing franchise mode for the first time and you buy FHM and start up a save file and it doesn't tell you anything what to do, I can't imagine navigating through all of that for the first time. And I'm not even really talking about in-depth tutorials as much as I am just showing the basics of how to do what you need to do in franchise mode and where everything is. Because as we know, there's a boatload of pages. There is a lot of information that needs to be taken in by the player in order to fully experience franchise mode. So I think even just showing the player where those things are and how they work would be a great start. Next, I want to talk about the mock draft. I understand that's a mock draft, but it is still basically pointless. I have seen players who were supposed to go in the first round according to the final draft rankings and have ended up dropping to over 100 picks later, and this isn't rare. I've seen this happen multiple times. Again, I know it's called a mock draft for a reason, but quite frequently it's so far off base from what actually happens in the draft that it's not even believable anymore. Like, I should be able to have a general idea of the range of picks that a player will actually be taken in, as opposed to 100 picks later or 200 picks later or 150 picks earlier. And I'm not saying it has to be entirely accurate. It's okay if a player drops, 20, 30 picks sometimes even. I mean, maybe if something like that happened once every 5 or 10 years or something, then I would buy it as believable, but it literally happens every year. It happens every single year in the draft, and I'm getting tired of it. And while we're on the topic, something I've noticed as of late in FHM 9 is that some players have multiple final draft rankings. I'm not sure what causes this, but it's clearly not supposed to happen. Now for something I'm pretty sure the community has been asking about for quite some time. That would be AI counter offers to trades. As it currently is, the AI will only accept or reject trade offers, and it's always up to the player to continue trade discussions. This makes trade negotiations feel very one-sided most of the time, and that's not exactly how negotiations work. So I feel like adding AI counter offers to the game would not only make it feel more alive, and like the AI GMs actually care about making their team better and getting fair value in a trade. Now I want to talk about suspensions. In particular, the messages that you get when your players get suspended. When one of your players gets suspended, you'll get a notification in the message center. But it doesn't include any information on why that player was suspended, only that they were and for how long. Me personally, as a GM, I would like to know why my players are being suspended, not that just are suspended for no reason in particular. I would also like to be able to appeal the suspension if I don't agree with the grounds of why my player is being suspended. I think all of that would make suspensions feel more meaningful and not just some random event that happens that handicaps my team for a few games because of a bad RNG roll. And while we're on the topic of suspensions, let's say your captain gets suspended. What I would like to be able to do is assign 3 alternate captains instead of a captain and 2 alternates. A situation that stands out in particular is for maybe a new expansion team that has no clear-cut choice for captain and doesn't want to assign a captain. So I think that would be a real nice touch if they added that. Next, something that is sorely needed, special ability development. Because something that I've noticed is that when you get into the later years of the simulation, players that have special abilities start to become even more rare than they already are. I understand that they were intended to be rare, I do, but to me it feels like they are too rare. This holds true particularly for generated prospects, which for me, seeing how my generated prospects turn out at the end of their careers is half of the excitement of doing a long-term franchise mode. And some of the best of them having special abilities would make for a much more unique individual player. So I think special ability development is pretty high up there on the wish list for me. And last but certainly not least of the topics that were discussed in last year's wishlist video, staff progression. This is my number one thing that I want in FHM 10. With how important of a role coaches and scouts are to a team in FHM, they should be given the ability to develop their ratings just like players can. The more successful they are in their role, the more their ratings should go up. That's how you think it should work, but it doesn't. Because what I personally notice is, the further you go into a save file and the more coaches retire, the more real coaches that retire, the less likely you are to find NHL viable coaches. And eventually you either have to settle for a coach you don't have full confidence in, or you have to take the reins and coach the team yourself. I do have more to say on this topic, but I'll come back to it in a bit, because now it's time to take a look at some newer ideas that I've had for FHM since the previous wishlist video. So staying on the topic of staff, something I would like to see is staff creation and the ability to create staff from a retired player's profile. I understand that not all players become staff when they retire, but still, it's my save file, and I should have the ability to have them become a coach, or a scout, or a trainer if I want to, and edit their staff profile. This could also help alleviate some of the issues that are present with the coaching staff not being able to develop their own ratings. Speaking of which, I would like to address a problem that has been present for a while with the staff system, and that's staffers that have job ratings across the board of 0. Now, just as an example, if a coach has a coaching rating of 0, then it doesn't matter how good the rest of his ratings are. Like, it doesn't matter if he has 20s across the board for everything else. If his job rating for a coach is 0, then he is completely useless as a coach, and he will not contribute anything to the success of the team. Now, obviously, not every staffer is capable of being a coach, and that's all fine. But as I mentioned before, there are some staff members that have 0s across the board for job ratings. They're not good at anything, meaning it doesn't matter what position you hire them in, they will not be effective whatsoever in anything. And to make matters worse, you are also unable to edit these ratings even with commissioner mode on, meaning that any staffer that has 0s across the board for job ratings are fated to be 100% useless for the entirety of the save file. Staff progression is one of the most needed things in this game, partially for this reason. And one more thing I would like to see added onto the staff page is more filters for sorting staff, such as coaching preferences and their staff role abilities, which you cannot currently filter by. Now, getting back to the topic of the drafts, I have noticed that the quality of generated prospects in general tends to fall off, especially in the later years, once 25, 30 years in and all the real or non-generated players have retired. And it also doesn't help that it's pretty common for a lot of the top generated prospects to be goaltenders. For example, at the end of the Calgary Flames save file, when we ended in the year 2047, I actually decided to continue that save file on a personal save file and use an expansion team as a challenge to, sort of start fresh sort of thing. And during the first draft of my expansion team's existence, I think there must have been 3 or 4 goaltenders in the top 10. It will drive you crazy how many top prospects are goaltenders in the later years. So overall, draft depth in general just needs to be improved, or even just reduce the factory-like production of generated goaltenders and put some quality skaters in their place. That would also help. Something I've been hoping for a while is the draft screen would show the stats of the prospects from the past season rather than displaying as nothing but 0s. I understand this is probably due to the draft taking place after July 1st when all of the season data switches over, but showing season stats on that screen instead of just on the player career profiles would make it a much more efficient way of comparing player stats when deciding who to draft. Now, obviously, I tend to look at a player's attributes first before looking at their stats, but when I don't have a player's attributes to go on, like when I don't have a player scouted, I would like to be able to look at their stats, and I would like to be able to look at all of them all at once so that I don't have to go into each individual player profile to look at their stats and compare them and decide who's the best one to draft. So obviously there is a way to check the player's stats from the past season. It's just not as efficient as I think it could be. And again, in a game where a lot of page navigation is required, having all that information available to you all in one spot is definitely something that should be prioritized. Next thing we need to talk about is trades and the underutilization of the trade block. As it is right now, the only thing you could do with the trade block is add players to it. I personally think we should have the option to add draft picks and players based on entered criteria, similarly to how EA NHL does it. I would also like to be able to set general team needs in order to help the AI offer better trades for the players that I have on the block. And something that we see pretty often during the offseason in the real NHL is arbitration hearings, but it is strangely enough not in FHM. I don't know if there's something that is preventing them from adding it, but I would definitely like to see it implemented to add to the offseason realism experience. Now I'd like to talk about a couple of additions I would like to see made to custom game save files in particular. First off is international tournaments. Those are not a thing in custom game save files. And I would also like to have the option to enable promotion and relegation between custom save file leagues. But for me personally, as a custom game save file player, both of these would be phenomenal additions to the custom game experience. What I would like to see personally is an expanded commissioner mode, aka sandbox or god mode, whatever you want to call it, where the player can take over and control every team at once without having to resign from the previous team. I mean, this is a thing in Eastside Hockey Manager, so don't tell me it's not possible. As someone who really enjoys sandbox modes in general in any game, that would be really fun for me. And related to sandbox mode, something that is desperately needed for roster editing in particular is a dedicated batch roster editor, please. I am tired of having to enable commissioner mode and go into each individual player profile to change their teams one by one. That would make custom community roster editing so much quicker, and community rosters could be a really good thing for this game. But unfortunately, as of right now, to my knowledge at least, there's no way to easily edit the rosters without going into each individual player's profile and changing their team that way. Something that I've recently experienced actually during a recording, and this is about historical GMOs in particular. I have noticed that many players will have the same bad personality traits causing team harmony issues for almost every team. For many of those players, their likability rating is 0. But it was my most recent recording where I just legitimately did not want to really finish that save file. Luckily, I did complete the challenge during that simulation year, so it was all well and good. But I almost did not finish it because of how many players had that exact same terrible personality that was just spreading throughout every locker room seemingly and causing team chemistry to get out of control. And no matter what I did, it seemed like I couldn't get a player that did not have that same awful personality trait. And I had my suspicions about it, so I just clicked on random players, checking their likability rating. Almost every single player that I clicked on had a likability rating of 0. So I don't know what the deal with that is, but it is clearly very broken and it needs to be fixed for historical franchise modes to be enjoyable, because that's a huge problem. Like, that's not just something that's an inconvenient bug or glitch. That's something that affects the gameplay at its core. that needs to be fixed. So just thought I'd tack that on to the end here of this wishlist video, considering it's something that I've just recently experienced. I didn't have this in the initial script, so that's why it's, you know, sort of out of place, but that definitely needs to be fixed. All right, adding one more thing onto the end here. I recently bought OOTP 24 while it was on sale, and let me just say, I sort of regret it. Now, it's not because it's not fun or that I don't enjoy it. It's because it has all the things that I wish FHM did. And that only makes me want it even more for FHM. I understand, you know, there's a much bigger development team behind OOTP and that it's probably been in development for much longer than FHM, but man, it's just, I see all those things that OOTP has, and it just makes me want it even more for FHM, and it's so good. Please try to get as many features from OOTP 24 into FHM. That's what I'm saying here. So that'll be it for this year's FHM wishlist video. I'm putting this up much later than I wanted to, for sure, just because of a very busy schedule lately. It's part of why I haven't been posting lately. But let me know what you guys want to see in FHM 10 and beyond. Not that I have any control over what goes into FHM and what doesn't, but it's related to the video, so why not? So with that, I'll end things off here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.